turning points. I mean, from the time you're born, the first one is learning to walk for some of us, and then learning to say mama and dada. You know, that's a turning point. And then starting school when you're a kid, graduating school. Some start straight to work. Some go to college. That's a turning point. Graduating college is a turning point. Falling in love and getting married. Which, by the way, there should be time between graduating school and that happening. You shouldn't do it right after, probably. And then midlife crisis. Some of us have gone through that, you know. You heard about the guy that was getting ready in the morning, and his wife was in the room, and he looked in the mirror, and he said, honey, I need you to say something encouraging to me. I look in the mirror, and I think, boy, there's a fat old man. And she thought for a minute, looked at him, and said, well, your eyesight's darn near perfect. So, you know, we all have points in our lives. And today I want to talk about a turning point in Jesus' life. Jesus went through turning points like all does. He came to earth, was born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth. Then he became an adult. He took on the position that his dad had. He was a carpenter, worked as a carpenter, and then he moved. He got him a house by the lake house, and lived there for a while around the Galilee, Sea of Galilee. Then he felt a calling. It was time for his ministry to begin. And so he took off the apron of the carpenter, and he gathered a team around him of disciples, and he began to preach and teach and heal people, do all kinds of miracles. And for the last 2 years, we've been looking at the last 2 years of him starting that ministry over the last few weeks. The Gospel of Mark records it very well, and he goes from place to place. He's always on the move. He's healing people. He's seeing things changed. He's feeding people, and he's doing all these different things, these turning points in his life. And today, we're at a point in his life where he is frustrated. Okay, he's frustrated because the Jewish people he came to minister to, it seems like all they're interested in and what they can get from him. They're not interested in what he's teaching so much as what, you know, the healing and stuff like that, the feeding of them. And so he's frustrated, and he's frustrated with the Pharisees. I mean, he feeds 5,000 people. That was men. He probably fed about 15,000 people. And right after he did it, he met the Pharisees, and the Pharisees come to him and they say, do you know that your disciples don't wash their hands? They're not ritually clean. I mean, they're so off base. And so he's frustrated by it, so he takes a little time in the north, away from Jews, away from the Jewish people. He goes up into Tyre and Sidon. I've got a map here. It shows you it's north of the Sea of Galilee. This was definitely not a place where many Jews were. And there he has an experience with this woman, the Syrophoenician woman, whose daughter was sick. She had a possession, and she asked for healing, and he came for the Jews. Jesus came primarily for the Jews, and so he tells her, he says, first let the children eat all they want, for it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs, the puppies. And Lord, she said, even the puppies under the table eat the children's crumbs. And so he liked that answer very much, and so he heals her daughter. And so he starts reaching out to more people who are outside the Jewish faith. And he goes to Sidon, and he does a turn around the Sea of Galilee to the Decapolis, which was a non-Jewish place. I think he's trying to stay away from the Pharisees because he's very frustrated by them. And so he spends some time away from the Pharisees and the Jewish people. And we pick up now in chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, when he was in the Decapolis. He says, during those days, another large crowd gathered, since they had nothing to eat. These weren't Jewish people, they were Gentile people. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for them. And they have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Imagine listening to preaching for 3 days and not eating. I get hungry after 3 hours. I'm hungry right now. I could eat right now. I ate breakfast. And Jesus said, if I send them away hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples said, well, where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? And they'd just gone through this, in a couple of chapters before. And he says, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground, and when they'd taken 7 loaves and gave thanks, the word there is Eucharist. We have the Lord's Supper. Sometimes we call it communion, and some denominations they call it the Eucharist. It means to give thanks, and that's what the word here in Greek is. They took the 7 loaves and had a Eucharist, and he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and they did it. They had a few small fish, the word ichthus, but it's a small fish. It's like a sardine. Some of y'all like sardines. I would not advise ever to eat them. That's just me. I don't like them. But there were small fish that he gave out. And he gave thanks for them and told the disciples to distribute them. And the people ate and were satisfied. The disciples picked up 7 large baskets of broken pieces that were left over. The word for basket here is the bigger basket than was in the other feeding of the people. This basket was the same size basket that Paul, when he was trying to sneak out, got let down in a basket. So it was a large basket. About 4,000 were present, and he sent them away, and he got in the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha, which is on the opposite side of the lake. I got a map here. He went from the south, where Gadara is, all the way up across the lake. First time he's in the area of the Jews, the area of the Pharisees, for probably many weeks. And so he just fed all these people, a great miracle. He got out of the boat, and immediately the Pharisees came and began to question him, to test him. And they asked him for a sign from heaven. This was very frustrating to him. I mean, every time he gets around these people, they're critical of his ministry. You ever had somebody who was like that with you? Every time you're around them, they're critical, bringing up some problem they see, and so he's just tired of it. And they come to him asking for another sign. Man, what did they want? He just fed 4,000 people. He's been doing one thing after another, showing that he's the Messiah, and he sighed deeply. I sigh deeply every time I stand up or sit down. You ever do that? And he sighed deeply because he was really frustrated by me. He said, why does this generation, not this just Pharisees, but this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, I'm not going to give them one. No sign. And then he left them. So this was a point in Jesus' life where he said, enough. I'm not arguing with them. I'm not discussing anymore. They're not changing. I leave them. So he left them. He got back into the boat, and he crossed over to the other side. Now, the disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. Remember, he just fed 4,000 people. There was tons of bread. It was left over, 7 baskets full of bread. They forgot to take any in the boat. Men, okay, a bunch of men. They got in the boat, there's no bread. And Jesus says, be careful, Jesus warned them, watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Now, I don't even know if Jesus realized that there was not but 1 loaf of bread. That's not why he said this. This was an illustration. In their understanding of yeast, and some of y'all know how yeast works, you put a little bit of yeast in the bread dough, and the bread rises. It affects all of the bread. And in Matthew, it says the yeast of the Pharisees is their teachings. And a lot of their teachings were against Jesus. And today, in our culture today, a lot of people are connected to teachings that are opposite of what the teachings of the Bible are. In fact, there's one teaching that's really popular now. If you look on YouTube, you can find videos of it. It's called deconstruction. And there are young people who have grown up in the church and have a faith that's been instilled by their parents and often by the church, and they are deconstructing their faith, taking it apart. They hear the critique that somebody have about the Bible, about it's not true, or the critique they have about Christians and churches, and so they take this and they just take their faith apart. And this can start in a very small way because, it's actually good to question things. It makes you, can lead to a deeper understanding, but it also can lead to a turning point in your life where you lose your faith. And this kind of is what Jesus is speaking against, this kind of behavior. Beware to have that doubt creep into your life where you question everything that you really deeply used to know. And so he's warning the disciples about that. Of course, they don't get it at all. They discuss, and they think it's because we have no bread. They're saying, it's because we forgot to bring the bread. Aware of the discussion, Jesus asked them, why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? You have eyes, but you fail to see? You have ears, you fail to hear? Don't you remember when I broke the 5 loaves for 5,000? How many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? 12. And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many baskets of pieces did you pick up? 7. And he said to them, do you still not understand? We have 1 loaf of bread, so what? I can make all kinds of bread. And they came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man and begged him to touch him. So this was on the Sea of Galilee. I got a map where Bethsaida was. It wasn't right on the shore. It was a little bit set off, this town. And there's a group of people that brought this blind person to Jesus to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand. He led him outside the village, and when he spit on the man's eyes and put hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and he said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. And once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now, when you first read this miracle, by the way, this miracle is only in the Gospel of Mark. And I don't think it's just a miracle about what happened. I think it's almost a parable that helps us understand what has been happening. Because it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you read it, you think, well, does that mean that Jesus said, here, try this, and it didn't work? And he said, oh, okay, well, that didn't work. Try this. No, that's not what happened. It wasn't that Jesus couldn't. Jesus could just say a word. He could think and heal somebody. He didn't have to do a special, elaborate ritual. He could just do it. So why did it have it like this? Well, I think it did to teach us a few things that we can learn from this miracle. First is, we are all spiritually blind. We are. You may think you're not, but you are. I mean, in Jesus' time, even though he was with all these people, nobody got it. The Jews didn't get it. The Jewish leaders didn't get it. His disciples didn't get it. The Romans didn't get it. Nobody understood what was going on. Nobody understood. Nobody got it. In our life today, we often think that we understand, I'm a pastor, I understand this, and I'm going to tell them this, and they're going to hear this, and I'm going to teach them this. Part of what it means to grow in your faith is to realize you don't know it all. There was a philosopher that said once, I don't know, but I know more than most people because I know that I don't know. And there's often times that we think that we understand everything and we just need to get them to get it. But often our own pride blinds us to our own faults. And you don't get it. Yesterday we had a softball game, and I like playing softball. I've played for years, and I think I'm pretty good at it. I fell running to first base, okay? I mean, how hard is it to run to first base? And before I knew it, I had fallen. First base, you don't even have to stop at. You just run past it, okay? I slid into first base. And my son came up to me and said, Dad, why did you do that? You think you're good at something, and then you do something foolish. And it's the same way in our spiritual lives. You might think that you're all that. You might think that you've arrived, that you've gotten over that problem in your life, but we haven't. we need to realize that all of us, in some ways, are spiritually blind. All of us need to grow. All of us has something in our lives that needs to change. And the second part of this is never be impatient with those who don't believe. Okay? I don't care how long you've been a Christian. Don't think that, oh, well, I've been since I was 12 years old and learned all this stuff and I know all this stuff. And why is it they don't change? Why is it they're not changing? Listen, never be impatient in judging other people. Don't look at other people and say, well, I don't know what their problem is. Listen, we all have problems. We have this tendency to think that, they just need to get it. They heard it, they just need to change. Sometimes it takes more than just knowledge. I had a friend that he never wore a seatbelt. You ever know somebody like that? Maybe some of y'all like that. He didn't like it strained him too much. And he would say, if I was in a wreck, it'd let me get out of it quick. And so one day he went to pick me up and he had a seatbelt on. And I said, wow, what are you doing with a seatbelt on? I'm glad to see that. He said, well, something happened. I said, what happened? He said, well, a buddy of mine who never wears a seatbelt got in an accident and he went through the windshield. And I went to see him in the hospital and he had like 103 stitches in his face. Changed him. Okay? I mean, he knew that legally he was supposed to do it. He knew that the statistics say you're supposed to do it, but when he had that experience with somebody, it changed him. And in your life and my life, never be impatient that somebody else hasn't got what the Lord has revealed to you yet. They will when God reveals it to them. And there are things that you haven't got that you may think that you know, and God may enlighten you in some way. So we ought to always be patient with those around us who are not where we are. 3, we are healed often in stages. Okay? Often it happens in stages. I mean, this guy needed a second touch for him to see. The first touch didn't do it. He needed a second touch. And sometimes in your life and my life, we may have made a decision to follow Christ, but we need other parts of our life to come around to Christ. I mean, we look at Paul often, and we think of this, story of Paul on the Damascus Road in Acts 9, where he has a total change of heart, and he went from being someone who persecuted the church to someone who, was totally different. And that happens sometimes with people. But more common, I think, is what happened to Peter. Okay, Peter started following the Lord, but he still had lots of problems in his life. And there were things that he failed in many different ways. He did good, and then he would do it bad, and he struggled, and he went up and down in his faith. I think that's more like what happens in my life. I mean, and just when you think that you get stuck, in a certain way, and you don't realize you're stuck. People get stuck between touches. Jesus touches your life and you become a Christian, but there's other parts of your life that really God is not satisfied with, and you don't realize it, and then all of a sudden somebody points it out to you and say, wow, I didn't know I did that. I do that. And you're convicted by that. And it happens sometimes in stages. I think most of the time in our lives, it's in stages. Used to, we called them revivals. That's where people come to Christ. It's also where people are convicted and move to a different place in their life. And this is what happened with this man. God touched his eyes with spittle, but then there was another touch that was needed, and the second touch he was healed. And I wonder in your life, do you long for God to touch you again, to change you again? Jacob in the Old Testament wrestled with God, and so he blessed him. He had this great desire to follow Christ or follow God in a whole way. Fourthly, we are often healed in community. I mean, it says that they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. It wasn't the blind man that found Jesus. It was his friends. And it says they begged Jesus. They brought him and begged him. There's something about being in a community. I mean, you can read the Bible and you can study it and you can learn more about God, but there's something about being in a community where you come and people get to know you and you allow them to see your struggles as well as your good parts. And you can't do it with everybody. You know, you have different circles of friends. There are some friends you have where basically you know them and you say hello to them. We don't have but a certain amount of time in our lives. And then there's some people that you have more in-depth relationship with. You get to know them. You know what they like and what they're like. And then you have, if you're blessed, you have a small group, your core group. These are your best friends. Maybe it's your family. And if you're blessed, it's your spouse. And they're like, they're what it's indispensable to have that kind of loving community that's supportive and understand you and are there for you. These people did this for this blind person. They begged Jesus to heal him. And it made a difference. And I don't know where you are in your life, but you need community. You really do. We all do. And I pray for those who haven't been in our fellowship because they've been not been able to come. And know that you're in our prayers and you're in our community by watching us every Sunday online. But in our church, we need that community. We need that kind of fellowship. And now it's not perfect. There are problems with it, but we need it. Jesus, it says, next, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Now here is the turning point of the whole book of the Mark. This is it. It takes place in the far north. I got a map here. Caesarea Philippi was the farthest north you could get on this map. From now on, in the rest of the book of Mark, Jesus travels from Caesarea Philippi all the way down to the south to Jerusalem. He doesn't go around the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee anymore. This is where he is. And so he's in this place that is far from the Jewish world. He's in Caesarea Philippi. And as he's going there, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" What a great question. He didn't say, "Who do you think?" He started out, "Who do people say that I am?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others one of the prophets." This is, we heard this before. And then he says, "Well, what about you? Who do you say I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." First time in the Gospel of Mark that a human being says Jesus is the Messiah. First time by Peter. Peter, who's flaky, who has good days and bad days, but here he steps up because God revealed it to him and says, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. This moment, the first moment when somebody recognizes who Jesus is, other than the devils, the demons, other than the narrator, it's the first time someone in the book of Mark recognizes who Jesus is and says it out loud. Jesus says, "You're the Messiah." It was a turning point. It was a turning point in Peter's life. I think it was a turning point in the disciples' lives. From then on, it wasn't that it never changed again, but it was a big moment. Now, in your life and my life, we've had turning points of different kinds. I mentioned a lot of the ones that most people have. One of the big ones was with me, was when I was young, I decided to follow Christ. It was the very best thing that's ever happened to me. I was 18 years old. I didn't grow up going to church, didn't have those Sunday school experiences or vacation Bible experiences a lot of our children have had, which I'm glad they have. And so I did that. And, we were sharing stories about this one day. We were traveling back. I went with a group of pastors, and over a period of 2 years, we visited churches. It was sponsored by the Baptist General Association of Virginia, and we would visit churches where the Lord was really moving. And these churches were growing in numbers as well as growing in people spiritually, and it was exciting. We went to Chicago. We went to some places in South Carolina. We went, believe it or not, to New York City. Can you believe that? We went to Jim Cymbala's church in New York City, Brooklyn Tabernacle. You've heard of Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir? We went there. Went to a couple of churches up there. We were coming back from New York, and we were on a long drive with 8 pastors in the van, okay? And they started sharing their testimonies, and they got longer and longer. You know how preachers are, long-winded. And one of the guys, I guess his testimony lasted about, it seemed like days. It was probably an hour and 20 minutes. Okay, I learned all this stuff. So it was my turn. And so what I said is I said, well, I didn't grow up going to church, but we moved to Forest Park in South Part Atlanta. I met a girl named Candy Smith, and yada, 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 I became a Christian. The guy driving the van said, that's the worst testimony I've ever heard in my life. And actually, I have a better testimony than that. I was impatient like Peter. It was a huge deal in my life. Didn't go to church at all, and I started going, and some of the people there reached out to me. I felt this kind of community that I guess this blind man felt. People cared about me. I had a Sunday school teacher that was there every time I played football at Forest Park High School. I was the best third-string quarterback Forest Park High School ever had. Somebody told me I was kind of small, but made up for it by being really slow. But the one time I played, he was there, and he told me next Sunday, hey, I saw you in that game, Scott. You know, he was encouraging to me. He did that kind of stuff to me, and very, very much helpful to me. And slowly, in the beginning, I thought, well, you know, I don't know if I believe in all this Christian stuff, but I know I like these people, and they seem to be really healthy, good people, and so I like being here. And as time went on, kind of like the sun comes up in the ocean, I saw that it was true. Myron Maxey, that Sunday school teacher, gave me a Bible and underlined a verse. It was all Scripture is inspired by God. And so I started reading it. Between reading the Bible and being in that Christian community, I came to the Lord, and at a campfire service in the mountains, at a youth camp, I made a decision, and I made it public, and I asked to accept Christ into my heart. My brother did as well, Bart, along with me. And we were baptized in that church. And it was a turning point in my life. It was not the only turning point, but it was an important moment in my life. And there's been other moments like that. And I wonder, in your life, where are you right now? Do you have a turning point? Are you at that moment? I feel sometimes lately that our church is at a turning point. You know, you ever get up early in the morning, and maybe you're near the James River, and the fog is just everywhere. You can't see nothing. And you're scared to even drive. But as time goes along, the fog kind of lifts, and all of a sudden you can see everything clearly. There's times in that in your life and my life when you couldn't see, and you were upset, and you were frustrated, and then miraculously God lifts the fog, and you had this turning point in life. I pray that when that happens, I pray that you will be aware of God moving, and that He'll clear your heart and your mind. Maybe that's where you are today. Maybe you feel like, you know, I need to do something. Maybe recommit my life. Maybe to come to Him for the first time. Maybe I'd say yes to a new thing in your life that you feel convicted about. May this be the day that happens. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your Son who healed this blind man and got him where he could see. And it didn't happen all at once, Lord. It happened where he only saw trees as people as trees, and then he saw clearly. Maybe there's someone here today, Lord, that can see, but not very clearly. I pray that you would touch them again. I pray that they would come to you in a real way and say yes for all of their lives. Turn it over to you. Thank you, Lord Jesus. In his name we pray. All God's people say, amen.